At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. Captain Ray Apache Morales had two jobs: keeping 5 million souls alive and personally threatening every single bolt, pipe, and power conduit that conspired to do otherwise. She gave the offending metal another percussive suggestion with her wrench. The clang echoed flatly in the cramped service crawlspace. The bolt, a relic from the original Ceres colony ship that an engineer unceremoniously welded onto the rock 60 years ago, remained unmoved. The thing stood as a monument to a man named Bronsky, whose shoddy workmanship plagued her family for 3 generations. She wedged herself in a tunnel so tight she could smell the synth grease on her own cheek. The scrubbed air was thick with the acrid scent of superheated ceramic from the fried power conduit she'd just bypassed. This was her life, an endless, grimy argument with dead engineers and stubborn metal. A low thrum vibrated through the deck plates beneath her, a familiar bass note that resonated in her jaw. The vibration was the sound of 5 million souls, breathing, working, shouting, loving, all woven into the discordant chorus of several thousand mismatched engines. The sound was home. Then another sound cut through it, a shriek. The cry of a red alert klaxon pierced the air, a sound that had remained silent for a generation. Drills were a polite pre-recorded chime and a gentle request to check station status. The noise that currently rattled her feelings was the sound of a universe that had just remembered its personal hatred for you and came over to explain why. Son of a glitch, Patch muttered, her feud with Bronsky's ghost forgotten. She shimmied backward out of the crawlspace, her heavy mag boots clanging on the mesh floor. She broke into a run before her feet were fully under her mind a flurry of diagnostic checklists. The journey to the bridge was a frantic full-body immersion into the soul of humanity's last, best, and ugliest creation. She sprinted down a wide corridor that doubled as the main street of the Kowloon arcology, its air a blended reek of a dozen cuisines. She dodged a hovering cart piled high with the steaming noodle bowls and skidded on a slick patch of synth oil near a hydroponics vat that overflowed with genetically belligerent tomatoes. Things seemed to glare at her as she passed. The air shifted from the sharp bite of hot metal on the engineering decks to a rich miasma of spices, damp soil, and the faint, sweet smell of yeast from a brewery hab tucked between a power substation and a daycare. She heard snippets of a dozen conversations, a cacophony of concerns shouted over the klaxons.
Get the kids inside! Is it the pirates again? Someone owes me 20 credits!
She vaulted a low graffiti-covered barrier and cut through a zero-G gymnasium, a vast spherical chamber where kids in brightly colored vac suits played a game that looked like tag mixed with orbital mechanics. Their joyous shouts, now tinged with fear, echoed eerily alongside the blaring alarms. They paused their game, their bodies oriented toward the nearest emergency station with an unthinking swiftness born of countless drills. One of them, a little girl with a fierce grin, gave her a thumbs up. Patch returned a grim, tight-lipped smile and moved on. Her path took her across a transparent plasteel observation deck. Below, in a cavernous fabrication bay lit by the white-hot glare of plasma welders, crews dismantled a freighter hulk piece by piece, their movements interlocking and swift. Its raw materials already fed into industrial-sized printers that extruded support beams for a new residential block. Everything was recycled. Everything had a purpose. Failure was just raw material for the next attempt. The constant low hum of the drive choir pulsed beneath her feet, a reminder of the ugly, beautiful heart of it all. Finally, she burst onto the bridge. There was no sterile, silent chamber of a military vessel. The place was a hub of activity, more a stock exchange trading floor during a market crash. Crew members shouted readouts, their voices weaving through the klaxon's blare. Half-empty coffee cups and squeezed-out protein gel tubes littered the consoles. In the center of it all, the main view screen showed a single object that hung in the star-dusted black. A Zephyrek probe, sleek, silver, and shaped like a scalpel. It moved with an unnatural fluid grace. Every line of its design was a testament to a technology that had never known the concept of good enough. Beautiful, elegant, and the most terrifying thing Patch had ever seen.
Sully, report.
She barked and slid into her command chair. Her tactical officer, a wiry man with a perpetually worried expression named Sully, kept his eyes on his console.
Zephyrek, Captain. Confirmed. One probe. No weapon signatures, but it bays us in every scan known to science, and a few that probably just invented. It's dissecting us from a distance.
Well, tell it to stop, she growled. Open a channel, standard greeting.
Already tried,
Sully said and shook his head.
They ignore us.
On the pristine bridge of the Zephyrek flagship, the constant silence served as a component of the design. The light from the holographic display cast sharp, unwavering lines. A subaltern moved to adjust a console. His hands didn't rush, yet no motion was wasted as he calibrated the sensor gain. Admiral Zalene Vorn stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture a perfect representation of his empire's philosophy, rigid, symmetrical, and absolute. He watched the probe's feed resolve into focus within a cool, blue-lit projection. The images were a physical, visceral insult to every principle he held sacred. The human vessel was a monstrosity. Humanity's debut into spacecraft was a blight upon an otherwise perfect universe. The first human Dreadnought was more akin to a mass of mechanical tumors than it was a spacecraft. It was huge, a bustling hive of parasitic insects. Humans. An asymmetrical accretion of mismatched modules, crude welds visible even from this distance. Hull plates of a dozen different alloys and ages were bolted together in a patchwork born of necessity. Thruster signatures flared in a chaotic, asynchronous rhythm, a discordant jumble of outputs that grated on his senses like a poorly composed musical score. He saw a floating garbage heap of cosmic proportions. Analysis, Zalene said, his voice as calm and cold as the ship's cryocoolant lines.
Mass remains in flux, Admiral,
the subaltern reported, his carefully modulated monotone cracking with a hint of disbelief.
It exceeds all known parameters for a single mobile object. Energy signatures are a chaotic mess. We read fusion, fission, antimatter, and several dozen drive technologies that defy classification. They seem to operate simultaneously in a state of constant opposition to each other.
Zalene stared, the corners of his mouth tightening in disgust.
That is a celestial tumor, not a ship,
he declared, the words dropping like chips of ice.
An abomination of unchecked growth that consumes resources and spreads without purpose or design.
Envoy Kala, a xenoecologist whose presence on his bridge Zalene tolerated as a political necessity, stepped forward. She leaned closer to a different set of data, the heat maps and bioscans, her expression alight with intellectual fervor.
"Admiral," she murmured, "the thermal bloom matches a high-density population. Look at the life signs. The sheer density has no precedent."
The display shifted to show the vessel as a glowing, throbbing cloud of biological energy. It pulsed with life, a chaotic but undeniably vibrant heartbeat in the deep black.
5 million souls,
Kala breathed, her analytical mind struggling to grasp the scale.
5 million individual sentient beings. This is a mobile ecosystem, Admiral. A city.
Zalene turned his head slowly, his gaze dismissive.
A city is a fixed point, Envoy. It adheres to the laws of orbital mechanics in established territory. A city is a known variable. This is a plague ship, a cancerous metastasis, and my duty is to see it sterilized before its chaotic ideology can infect the system.
In the heart of Big Mama, in a cavernous chamber known as the Nexus, Darius Choirboy Anselmi watched the soul of his city catch fire. Fiber optic cables, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the walls and ceiling, pulsing with the tides of colored light. Reds of panic bled into ambers of uncertainty and blues of inquiry. Each pulse was a thought, a fear, a vote. The chamber held the choirnet, the central nervous system of their liquid democracy, and right now it screamed a digital roar of pure panic that he felt as a pressure behind his eyes. He stood on a suspended platform, surrounded by holographic displays that showed not tactical data, but the beautiful, terrifying flow of human consensus. He saw the initial wave of panic, a chaotic flood of red across the network. Then, he watched as the system he designed began to work. It channeled the panic instead of suppressing it. Millions of citizens who acknowledged their lack of expertise in interstellar standoffs delegated their vote weight. The section of the network labeled Immediate Tactical Command began to glow with a steady, fierce green as authority flowed in real time to a single node, Captain Morales and Bridge Command. But the biggest question remained, the one that defied delegation. Strategic imperative: fight or flee. This presented a moral question, a question of identity, and it belonged to everyone. Darius saw arguments erupt in 1,000 digital forms. He saw fearmongers and saber-rattlers shout into the digital dark. His job was to conduct, not command. His fingers swept across his console, isolating and boosting data streams, not censoring them. He amplified the calm voices, the ones who used reason and history as their evidence. He highlighted data packets that showed their current fuel or resource levels and contrasted them with the unknown variables of a blind fight into deep space. He was a social architect who turned a mob's roar into a choir's voice. On a locked sub-menu on his console, an icon labeled Course Invocation remained dark. The invocation was his madman's dream, a theoretical direct democracy override he built as a failsafe, a system to weaponize consensus itself. His colleagues called it insane, a blueprint for anarchy. He prayed they were right. He might need it. The decision aggregated at 93 seconds, a staggering 88% consensus. Hold, stand, defend. Big Mama was their home. They would run no more. Darius nodded, a slow, proud smile on his face. He keyed a simple, plain-text transmission, unencrypted and open for the galaxy to hear. He sent it to the Zephyrite probe. It contained just 6 words. We are here. We are one. Aboard the Constant, the human message appeared on Zalin's display. He read it once, then again. The lack of military encryption, the absence of electronic warfare probes, the simple, almost childish sentimentality of the words, it all gave him the proof he needed. Brute arrogance, he stated, his voice flat. They believe their mere existence is a defense. They fail to comprehend what they face. He turned to his tactical officer. We will provide a lesson in consequence, an education in the immutable calculus of power. He gestured to the holographic model of Big Mama. A targeting reticle appeared. His analyst, guided by Zephyrite doctrine, identified the most likely command and control center. A subaltern spoke, a furrow in his brow betraying his confusion. Admiral, their primary communications array is inexplicably mounted on an unarmored external population module. The configuration defies all tactical logic. Zalin's lip curled in a sneer that was almost imperceptible. Brutes often mistake prominence for importance. The logic of a creature that puffs out its chest to appear larger. Target their vanity. He gave the order, his voice a blade that cut through the silent bridge. Prepare a full salvo of Padron torpedoes.
A targeted strike. Let them understand that we can touch them whenever and wherever we choose. Let them feel the unerring path of a truly ordered mind. From the forward weapon bays of the Constant, a swarm of plasma torpedoes launched, their drives a silent, brilliant flare. They moved with terrifying speed, a pack of silver wolves that closed in on their prey, their courses perfectly synchronized. On the bridge of Big Mama, the klaxons reached a new, frantic pitch.
Torpedo launch detected! Multiple hostiles! Sapphiric pattern classification! The Commandant Hunt, Captain! First! Trajectory!
Patch snapped, her eyes locked on the screen, her mind erased through 1,000 failing defense scenarios.
They pegged a single target! Oh, gods!
Sully's face went pale.
They're targeting Habitat Block Gamma 9! Impact in 1 minute, 40 seconds!
A cold pit opened in Patch's stomach. Gamma 9. The old Arkship module from the Proxima Diaspora. Residential, civilian, schools, parks, almost 90,000 people. The Zephyric, with their perfect, arrogant logic, had mistaken a city block for a command center. A fatal, logical error that they would correct with overwhelming force. Time for evacuation ran out. No time remained for shields to recalibrate for a focused, multi-vector attack. Only enough time for a choice, a horrible, brutal choice that defied reason.
ETA 1 minute!
Sully counted down, his voice trembled. Patch acted instantly. Her voice was iron, forged in the scrapyards and cooled in the black between stars.
Blow the bolts! Seal the internal bulkheads! Full triage procedures for Sector Gamma!
The bridge crew froze. A young ensign at the communications post, no older than 20, looked at her, his face slack with disbelief and horror.
Captain, 90,000 people are in that block. We can't just...
ETA 45 seconds!
Sully shouted. Patch's eyes, hard as ball bearings, locked onto the ensign. For a second, he saw the immense weight of 5 million souls settle on her shoulders.
And 5 million people live on this ship.
She roared, her voice a plasma torch that cut through the rising panic.
We amputate the limb to save the body. I gave you an order, Ensign, not a request for an opinion. Now do it!
The ensign flinched and turned back to his console, his hands slapping a sequence of keys that activated the explosive charges. On the main view screen, they saw it. A series of controlled sequential explosions ripped along the structural frame that connected Gamma 9 to the main body of Big Mama. Massive explosive bolts designed for the exact unthinkable contingency, detonated with concussive force. A kilometer-wide section of their home, a city in its own right, sheared away. It tumbled slowly in vented atmosphere and debris into the cold vacuum of space. The entire ship shuddered from the violent, self-inflicted wound, a deep groan of tortured metal that echoed in the bones of everyone on the bridge. The Zephyric torpedoes, their trajectories locked, slammed into the jettisoned block just seconds after it cleared the hull. A silent, incandescent flash shattered the module, which slagged into a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated metal and fragmented components. Patch stood rigid, her face set like shipyard scrap. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of her console. She had just given the order that murdered 90,000 of her people. Survival had its price, and it tasted like ash. A muted professional acknowledgement of success rippled through the Constance bridge. The main display showed a perfect, clean hit.
Direct hit confirmed, the tactical officer reported, his voice crisp. Target neutralized.
Admiral Zaline allowed himself a small, thin smile. The lesson was delivered. Simple, clean, conclusive. Then the smile vanished. The low hum of the bridge system seemed to amplify in the sudden, confused stillness. The human vessel, though clearly damaged, refused to falter. Its chaotic energy signature, which should have collapsed into disarray with the destruction of its command center, barely flickered. Its thousands of engines continued their discordant hum. The ship held its course, a wounded behemoth that refused to acknowledge its own death. From hidden bays in the human vessel, a dozen smaller craft, scavenger drones, and tugs swarmed out. They headed not for the main ship, but for the expanding cloud of debris where the module was destroyed. Kala stepped forward, her eyes wide, her voice a whisper.
Admiral, they deploy magnetic grapples and reclamation scoops. Analysis indicates they target high-mass, high-purity material.
The main view screen zoomed in and cut through the glowing cloud of vaporized metal. The drones worked in a grid, harvesting the wreckage. They sought no survivors. They grappled superheated chunks of hull plating and fused electronics and sorted them by elemental composition in real time.
They are not mourning, Admiral,
Kala said, her voice hollow as she watched the bioscans remain empty.
They are salvaging. They resource profile the wreckage of their own habitat.
Zaylin stared, the condescending certainty on his face cracking, replaced by a chilling, profound horror. He was witnessing an organism that would chew off its own limb to escape a trap, and then consume the severed limb for sustenance. He was horrified that it survived, but more so at the sheer, brutal pragmatism of the act. He was witnessing a violation of the natural order, an ecology of madness. Zaylin prided himself on his adaptability within the rigid framework of Zephyric doctrine. The initial hypothesis was false. New hypothesis. He faced a hive, a swarm. The solution to a swarm required overwhelming systemic saturation. Order applied broadly and without mercy. Launch all squadrons, he commanded, his voice regaining its icy composure. Cruisers will advance in a cleansing array. We will dismantle this anomaly piece by piece. We will impose order through overwhelming systematic force. From the sleek bays of the Zephyric fleet, hundreds of smaller strike craft emerged in interlocking waves. They were a symphony of deadly geometry, a testament to centralized command and flawless execution. Prepared to dissect Big Mama with 1,000 simultaneous cuts. Deep within Big Mama, in a communal square on Deck 42 that smelled of baked bread and hydraulic fluid, an old man named Nestor carefully wrapped an antique music box in a soft cloth. It was made of real wood from Earth, and it played a tinny, haunting melody by a composer whose name was forgotten long before the diaspora. His granddaughter, a 16-year-old named Zara, watched him, her face smudged with carbon scoring. She wore the repurposed dockworker's jumpsuit of her neighborhood defense council, a pulse rifle slung over her shoulder. "Are you sure, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice soft. Nestor finished wrapping the music box and held it out to her. "It played lullabies for your mother," he said, his voice raspy. "Now it can buy you a chance to have children of your own. There is no better use for it." He smiled, a sad, weary expression. "Besides, I remember the tune." Zara took it, her calloused fingers gentle on the polished wood. She said nothing. She walked over to a makeshift munitions depot set up next to a closed-down coffee kiosk. The man who ran it, a grizzled ex-miner with a plasma burn scar down his face, took the music box with a reverence that felt like a prayer. He traded her a heavy metal box in return. Zara slid the lid open. Inside, nestled in foam, were 3 dozen high-velocity railgun slugs, their tungsten tips a gleam under the dim lighting. The exchange was silent, freighted with the unspoken grief of 1,000 similar transactions all over the ship. They melted down their history, trading the fragile remnants of their past to forge the brutal tools needed for their future. War demanded its price, paid not in credits or lives, but in memories. The Zephyric attack was beautiful in a terrifying way.
Lances of golden light converged on Big Mama from a dozen different vectors, a web of pure energy designed to overwhelm any single shield generator. A textbook maneuver, flawless in its execution. Big Mama's response was an ugly, glorious, unholy mess. No central fire control existed. Hundreds of individual gun turrets, most of them repurposed asteroid mining lasers, plasma cutters, and mass drivers, opened up at will. In a heavily armored blister turret on Deck 12, a crew of retired freighter captains argued over a targeting solution.
Go for the lead cruiser!
One shouted.
The squadron of the port flank is the bigger threat!
The other yelled back before the third just shrugged and fired at a target of opportunity. Their volley was joined by a battery of kinetic launchers operated by the Farmers Collective in Hydroponics Bay 3, who had decided via a quick consensus vote to unleash a salvo of iron-rich asteroids. The defense was less a coordinated effort and more a statistical shotgun blast the size of a moon. An unpredictable, asynchronous storm of fire that defied any attempt at predictive targeting. On the bridge, Patch watched the chaos unfold.
Sully, can you make any sense of that firing pattern?
No, Captain, Sully replied, a hint of awe in his voice. And if I can't, neither can they. In the Nexus, Darius fought no battle. He conducted an orchestra of noise. The Saphiric ships, with their advanced weapons, tried to lock onto the gravitic signature of Big Mama's core drive. But Big Mama had no core drive. They still think of us as a single ship, Darius said to his small team, a manic grin on his face. They're trying to find the soloist in the middle of a death metal concert. He opened a comm channel to the bridge. Captain, their targeting solutions are adapting. They're trying to average out the noise. I need to make more noise.
What do you have in mind, choir boy?
Patch's voice crackled back. I'm not telling them how to fly, Captain, Darius said. His left-hand keying commands to modulate power flow while his right flicked through engine diagnostics. I'm just asking them to dance badly. He sent a command through the choirnet, a simple request delegated to the thousands of engineering crews across the ship. Desynchronize. The phase drive choir was composed of 7,412 independent mismatched drives. Now, on Darius's command, they fell out of harmony. A clunky fusion drive from a salvage ice hauler pulsed a fraction of a second late. An ancient antimatter engine from a colony ship sputtered erratically. A set of brand-new high-output gravitic drives pushed and pulled against each other. To the 5 million people aboard Big Mama, the sensation was a low, gut-rumbling thrum that vibrated up through the soles of their boots, a lurching, nauseating shudder, like a dozen washing machines in a death metal spin cycle. But to the Zephiric targeting computers, it was a cataclysm. The uniform, singular gravitational signature they tried to lock onto dissolved into a hurricane of gravitic distortion. Their sensors were blinded by the sheer, chaotic noise. Their unerring lances began to miss, slicing through empty space as the ship shuddered and vibrated its way through the storm. Admiral Zaline watched his squadron's effectiveness plummet. His perfect echelons were chipped away by random, unpredictable impacts. His advanced weapons were useless. Frustration, a chaotic and unworthy emotion, began to curdle in his gut. He fell back on another proven tactic, one designed to counter decentralized insurgencies. If we cannot dissect it from the outside, he declared, his voice a low growl, we will sever its nervous system from within. He was still convinced, on a fundamental ideological level, that a center had to exist, a command core, a queen bee. All chaos was merely complex order misunderstood. He would find the core and crush it. Prepare boarding parties, Zaline commanded. Breach the hull at multiple points. Locate and neutralize their central command. Zephiric assault pods, hardened projectiles designed to punch through meters of warship armor, slammed in Big Mama's hull. A squad of Zephiric elite, led by Subcommander Tecton, breached what their scans identified as a structurally significant section. They expected to disgorge into sterile military corridors. The pod punched through the outer wall of the Grand Mesa shopping district.
The Zephyric commandos, clad in sleek silver armor and armed with pulse rifles, stormed out of their pod into a 3-story atrium filled with noodle shops, electronic stalls, and startled civilians. The air smelled of fried dough and superheated wiring. For a moment, everyone just stared. Tecton's command display was a mess of unclassified life signs and structural anomalies. Then a shopkeeper hurled a sizzling wok at the lead commando's head with a furious scream. The fight became a brutal confrontation. The battleground was a residential block, and the defenders were 5 million angry homeowners. This escalated into a large-scale home invasion, and the residents responded accordingly. As Tecton and his soldiers tried to advance, bulkheads designed to contain market fires and atmospheric breaches slammed shut, a maze that reconfigured itself in real time based on votes from the local shopkeepers association. They were channeled down corridors where welders from the maintenance crews waited with industrial-grade plasma cutters. They were herded into cargo bays where dock workers and massive exoskeletons swung magnetic grapples with their upper arms while bracing with their lower pair, turning the tools into medieval flails. In one sector, a Zephyric squad breached a wall and found themselves on the ceiling of a gymnasium, their magnetic boots clinging to the metal plates. The local defense council, run by the gym's PE teacher, a woman with a surprisingly commanding voice, simply reversed the gravity plates. The elite soldiers, trained for zero-G combat but unprepared for a sudden 1G reversal into a hard floor, tumbled screaming into the unforgiving embrace of physics. The Zephyric had just learned the most fundamental rule of the universe. Never, ever mess with a human's home. Big Mama was a home, not a warship. They captured Tecton, of which they thought was a name as subtle as a rock slide. Patch, who monitored the chaotic internal defense from the bridge, gave a specific order. Take him to the Obatorium on Deck 16. Give him a bottle of water and let him sit. Tecton, stripped of his weapons but not his arrogant pride, was marched under heavy guard into a vast, sunlit cavern. Real trees grew from rich soil under full-spectrum sun lamps. The air was clean and humid. Children laughed and chased each other around a fountain. The ship shuddered from a distant external impact, and a few leaves drifted down from the trees. But no one seemed to panic. Instead, a maintenance crew with a cart of expanding sealant foam ambled over to a small crack that appeared in a massive viewport. They patched it while they argued good-naturedly about a card game. The commander was forced to sit on a bench. Patch walked up a few minutes later and wiped grease from her hands with a rag. She sat next to him, leaving a respectable distance. For a long time, they just sat. Finally, Tecton, his rigid Zephyric worldview crumbling around him, had to ask, "Why?" He said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Why are you not disciplined? Why do you permit this emotional chaos? You are dying. This entire structure is a testament to failure and decay." Patch watched a young girl help one of the maintenance workers apply a patch. "This is why," she said, her voice quiet but rough as gravel. "We see a leak to a patch as a job to do. This place was built from the failures of 100 other colonies. Failure is in our bones. It's our foundation. We don't pretend it's absent. We build on top of it." She turned to look him in the eye and saw no fear there, only a weariness as deep as space itself, and a stubborn resolve that was even deeper. "You see chaos, I see resilience. You see emotion as a weakness. We see it as the glue that holds all this scrap together. We laugh, we cry, we get angry, and we get the job done. We smile because it keeps the rust out," she said. "And we built this home to last." Envoy Kala was a scientist first and foremost, and the data screamed at her. Every Zephyric predictive model she ran on the humans' chaotic tactical responses crashed. The data was nonsensical, a random walk of irrational decisions that somehow resulted in a successful defense. It was like watching a slime mold solve a maze.
an act of intelligence without a discernible intellect. On a hunch, driven by a sudden insistent question that overrode her military discipline, she bypassed Admiral Zaline's command firewalls. She took the raw data of the human defense, the random turret fire, the gravitic noise, the rerouting of the borders, and fed it into a different analytical model, one for studying the emergent intelligence of complex ecosystems, ant colonies, flocking birds, coral reefs. A pattern emerged. The shape of the data showed no rigid top-down geometry of a command structure. It revealed something else, a beautiful, terrifying, higher form of order that emerged organically from the interaction of millions of independent agents, a symphony of consensus. Her fingers trembled as she opened a clandestine, encrypted communication channel and aimed it at the source of the human's strange, simple greeting. Her first message was a scientist's awestruck accusation. "You're not chaos. What are you?" The reply, from a node that identified itself as Darius, came back almost instantly. "We are the conversation." A second later, another message from him. "And who, may I ask, is listening?" "I am Kala," she typed back, "a xenoecologist. My models cannot process you. Your actions defy statistical modeling." "That's because your models assume a single mind," Darius replied. "You're trying to measure the tide by capturing one wave in a bucket. You need to look at the whole ocean." "An ocean of individuals," Kala mused. "But you act in concert without a central command. How?" "Faith," came the simple, maddening reply. "We have faith in each other." Admiral Zaline pulled his forces back. His elite boarding parties were decimated, his squadrons battered. He established a blockade, a classic patient siege tactic designed to starve an enemy into submission. A ship that large with that many mouths to feed must have a colossal logistical tail. He would cut it. He would wait. Order was patient. A week later, his logistics officer delivered a report, his face pale, his voice trembled with a horror that transcended mere military concern. "Admiral, the human vessel, it's not starving." The command display shifted to a long-range enhanced view. Big Mama deployed massive magnetic scoops and swarms of scavenger drones. They swept the entire battlefield section by section. They pulled in the shattered hulls of Zephyric strike craft. They collected the spent energy casings from their own kinetic weapons. They harvested every scrap of metal, every drifting component. The officer brought up another window that showed spectrographic analysis. "They're feeding it all directly into their onboard fabricators, Admiral. They break it down to raw elements and use it to print new hull plates, new components, new munitions." The fusion forges in the reclamation bay, visible even at this distance as a fierce, intermittent glare, roared and consumed a week's worth of power in an hour to turn Zephyric hubris back into human steel. Zaline stared at the readout, a cold dread seeping into his bones. His fleet's resources were a net loss with every hit landed, while the humans were a net neutral. He was feeding the monster, a monster that consumed violence and shut out resilience. His entire philosophy, the bedrock of his civilization, was built on the idea that order consumes chaos. For the first time in his life, he faced an enemy that did the opposite. Admiral Zaline, his conventional strategies exhausted and his ideology shaken to its core, saw only one path left. When logic fails, apply more logic. When order is challenged, impose a greater order. He would prove the fundamental truth of the universe, that perfect, overwhelming order can and must erase any anomaly. "Prepare the balance net," he commanded. The order fell into a bridge that was, for the first time, truly silent with dread. The balance net was a final solution.
It was a fleet-wide synchronized firing pattern, a maneuver so complex it took a planetary-scale computer to calculate. The entire Zephyric fleet would move as one and fire their primary weapons in a perfectly timed sequence. To function, the energy wave required a uniform gravitic lock on the target's center of mass to initiate a waveform collapse. It was the ultimate expression of Zephyric philosophy, a million voices that spoke a single undeniable word. His fleet began to move and arrange itself into a vast, perfect geometric lattice around Big Mama. It was beautiful. It was symmetrical. It was a death sentence written in equations and vectors. The news of the Zephyric's grand geometric arrangement spread through Big Mama like a virus, a primal terror that overwhelmed any tactical report. The sheer, terrifying perfection of their maneuver was an ideological attack as much as a physical one. For the first time since the conflict began, the QuireNet was overwhelmed. Darius watched in horror as his beautiful singing network devolved into a screaming mob. The system of delegated trust, the very foundation of their society, began to crack. Local councils, once united in purpose, argued and blamed each other for tactical mistakes. Panic voting flooded the Nexus as citizens retracted their delegations and spammed the main strategic poles with incoherent terror. The lights on the fiber optic cables strobed violently, a chaotic, arrhythmic flashing. Big Mama's collective consciousness was on the verge of a grand mal seizure. Patch stormed into the Nexus, the air crackling with the audible hum of 5 million panicked minds.
Darius, shut it down!
She yelled over the din.
The Quire's tearing us apart! Sever it from the tactical command! Give me the stick. I'll fly this bucket myself. I can try to outmaneuver the wave.
Darius stood on his platform, his face pale with strain, sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked from the avalanche of pure panic on the display to Patch's desperate, strong face. Her plan was logical. It was pragmatic. It was also, he knew, doomed to fail. You couldn't outfly a wave that was everywhere at once. He shook his head, a terrifying, insane idea that bloomed in his mind. No, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Do the opposite.
The opposite?
Patch stared at him as if he had lost his mind.
The opposite is chaos. The opposite is a riot. Exactly.
Darius' eyes lit up with a feverish, desperate brilliance.
We open the floodgates completely, activate the course invocation, dissolve the system of delegation, give every single citizen a direct, raw input. A trigger for a point defense gun, a microsecond burn on a directional thruster, a targeting priority for a single drone. We don't try to suppress the panic.
He took a deep, shuddering breath. We weaponize the panic itself. Patch was aghast, her pragmatic engineer's mind recoiling from the sheer insanity of the suggestion.
That's not strategy, Darius. That's plugging 5 million screaming monkeys into the controls of a starship. You'll kill us all with this digital seance.
He met her gaze. His own belief wavered, but held.
Your way is a guaranteed logical death, Captain. My way is an insane chance at life. The QuireNet is already linked to everyone's personal comms, their cochlear comms, and optic interfaces. It was designed for voting. I can switch the output from opinion to action. It won't be elegant, but it will be a signal. A riot is a language their perfect orderly system can't possibly comprehend.
Patch looked from Darius's wild eyes to the panicked faces of her bridge crew who watched the exchange on the secondary screen. She looked at the Quire's net's display, a waterfall of systemic failure and raw human terror. She saw her ship, her home, her entire world about to tear itself apart from the inside, moments before the enemy tore it apart from the outside. She thought of the old man and his music box. She thought of the children who played in the zero-G gym. She thought of the welders and the noodle vendors and the farmers. They were a riot, always had been, barely held together by rust, resolve, and gravity plating. Darius didn't suggest something new. He suggested they finally embrace what they truly were. She took a deep breath.
The scrubbed air tasted of burnt wiring and rancor. She made a choice. She strode to her command chair and keyed her comm to the entire ship-wide address. Her voice, raw and steady and utterly devoid of panic, cut through the digital screaming and the blaring klaxons. "All right, you bastards," she said, and a grim, tired smile touched her lips. The whole ship went silent and listened. "This is your captain. You wanted a say in how this ship runs? You got it. Darius is opening the choir. Every single one of you now has a trigger or a stick. You have one job." She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice a conspiratorial growl that carried to every corner of their sprawling home. "When you see the pretty lights, do something, anything. Steer straight, shoot true, and for the love of God, try to avoid the hydroponics bay on Deck 12. They just got the new batch of strawberries in." She paused, then added, "Patch out." The balance net began to fire. The Zephyric fleet pulsed as one, a silent, terrible gathering of power that built the perfect, coherent wave of energy. In response, Big Mama erupted. The ship convulsed in a seizure, an explosion of 5 million individual actions, 5 million panicked reflexes, 5 million desperate acts of survival, all at once. Thousands of mining drones, cargo haulers, and maintenance pods swarmed out from the hull like angry bees, controlled by a million different hands. Cargo containers filled with scrap metal, spare parts, and literal garbage launched from the mass drivers and formed a chaotic, unpredictable cloud of kinetic decoys. Every single one of the ship's 7,412 thrusters fired in a million different microsecond bursts, controlled by 5 million different wills. Inside the ship, it was pandemonium. Lights flickered as power rerouted erratically. Gravity plates shuddered and created waves of nausea. The entire structure groaned and shrieked under the strain of a million contradictory commands. The ship jinked, shuddered, and weaved with the collective spastic reflexes of a million-person hive mind that screamed in unison. It moved in ways that violated every law of sane piloting. It presented a targeting profile that was a probabilistic cloud of insanity. Zalen's perfect weapon, designed to lock onto a single, predictable center of mass, met a wall of pure, uncomputable chaos. The gravitic signature of the ship dissolved into a storm of noise and fractured the spheric targeting solution into 5 million competing data points. A catastrophic feedback loop raced through their synchronized network. The balance net failed to achieve a stable target lock. Its coordinated wave collapsed on itself and fizzled into a pathetic, asymmetrical discharge of wasted energy that washed harmlessly over the spasming human vessel. The chaos didn't outrun the bullet. It made the gun jam. The Zephyric fleet, its ultimate weapon spent, its perfect arrangement broken by the recoil of its own failed weapon, hung in space, battered by the storm of human debris. On the bridge of the Constant, Admiral Zalen stared at his tactical display. It showed only static, failure, and the ghost of an enemy that refused to obey the laws of physics or reason. The silence on his bridge became the sound of utter defeat. On the bridge of Big Mama, a different kind of silence fell. A profound, ringing silence broken only by the ragged, desperate sound of breathing. Everyone stared at the view screen and watched the Zephyric fleet drift impotent. They had survived. Then a single, joyful whoop from a comms channel in the engineering sector. It was followed by another from a defense turret on the outer hull. Then another and another until the entire ship, all 5 million souls, erupted in a single, deafening, joyous roar of victory and relief. Patch slumped into her captain's chair, the strength finally leaving her legs. She dropped her head into her hands and laughed, a raw, exhausted, half-sobbing sound of pure triumph. Darius stood beside her, his face streaked with tears, and watched the choir net. The violent panic strobing was gone. The fiber optic cables pulsed with a gentle, synchronous golden light. It no longer screamed. It sang.
You magnificent, crazy son of a bitch, Patch whispered, her eyes on the screen.
The choir sings, Captain, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. It always does.
A new signal appeared on the tactical display, a small Zephyric shuttle which broadcast on an open, unencrypted channel broke from the retreating fleet. It approached slowly, its weapon ports visibly open and empty. It requested permission to dock. It asked for asylum. Darius was already receiving a plain text message from the shuttle's occupant. He nodded, a slow smile that spread across his face.
It's Kala, he said. The Zephyric scientist had made her choice. She had chosen the chaotic, vibrant, and surviving weeds over the sterile, perfect, and defeated garden. As her shuttle was guided into a docking bay and welcomed by a crowd of curious, grease-stained engineers and dock workers, Patch keyed her comm. Darius, damage report. A pause, filled with the sound of frantically scrolled data. Extensive, Captain. We blew out 3 aft cargo bays. The ship's entire supply of synth tofu has been jettisoned, and I think Deck 27 plumbing now flows in reverse. Patch leaned back, a genuine, weary smile finally reaching her eyes. Sounds about right. Get a crew in that plumbing. The tofu can stay where it is. Just then, new signals began to light up on the long-range comms, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Human signatures from scattered mining outposts in the Helios belt and forgotten colonies on the fringe of the Tau Ceti system. And they were not alone. Other signals of alien origin, a Gnarl trading post, a fleet of nomadic jet, from downtrodden client worlds on the edge of the Zephyric Empire, began to appear as well. They had all been watching. They had all heard the choir's defiant song. They were all asking variations of the same eager question. Is there room for more? Patch looked at the view screen, at the distant, retreating lights of the Zephyric fleet and the new, bright lights of approaching friends. Big Mama, scarred and battered, its hull patched with the wreckage of its enemies, slowly began to turn. Its thousands of engines, once a discordant mess, began to hum in something that sounded, for the first time, like a chord. The ship had become a moving beacon, a chaotic, ugly, and utterly beautiful idea, now heading out to gather its children home.